Hello Blender heads and welcome to 2021. As promised, I've been working on the final chapter in our Retopology series, and this video is going to be covering the paid add-on Retopoflow. Now, having recently used both the default Blender Retopology tools and the Speed Retopo add-on, I can honestly say that I think Retopoflow is easily the most powerful way to do Retopology in Blender, and at least for me has been worth the price tag that comes with it. Now, the developers have recently released Retopoflow version 3, so if you were thinking of getting this add-on, now is probably a good time to jump on the bandwagon. For those of you who don't have disposable income to be able to get this kind of an add-on, check out the previous video on the Speed Retopo add-on, which is free, and it does a lot of the same things, although it is missing a couple of useful tools. There will be a link in the description below. Now, to test this add-on, we're going to need a model to retopologize. And there's a couple of tools in this add-on where the Spyro model from our previous lessons, I just feel it's not going to be the best model to be able to demonstrate this with. So, for this tutorial, I'm going to be giving you access to the Gremlin model from some of my previous sculpting videos. Now, the final Gremlin model came in at around about 5 million polygons, and I know that some of your systems probably aren't going to be able to handle something quite that dense. So what you'll get is this model here, which has been decimated to around about 320,000 faces. In fact, if we just turn off the claws and some of the mouth stuff, you can see over here, it's just over 320,000 faces. And if I just turn on the wireframe, you can see that this has been decimated. This model is completely unusable for animation, but it's perfectly fine for doing retopology. So I'm hoping that everybody's system is going to be able to run with this many polygons, and look, if your system can't, feel free to go back and use the Spyro model from the previous lessons. There will be links to both the Gremlin model and Spyro in the description below. So to get the Gremlin model, click the link below and it will take you to this Gumroad page. Even after decimating this model, the Blender file still comes out at around about 35 megabytes. And unfortunately with files that big, Gumroad forces you to put a price tag on the download. So you can see here I've just got him up there for $2. Fortunately, you can still add codes and stuff to Gumroad, so feel free to use the free code at checkout and you can still download this guy for free. So you've got two options. You can either download the Blender file, which is this one here, and it comes with the claws and the mouth and all these extra little pieces, as well as a simple lighting setup. Or you can download the FBX file. Now, the FBX file is just the Gremlin body, so it's not going to have all that extra geometry such as the claws and the teeth or the lighting setup. The claws and the teeth and stuff, they have some sculpted detail in them, and all of the models together still come up to over 1 million polygons. So the FBX is for those of you with slightly slower computers that maybe can't handle that many polygons. Also, the FBX means that you can then import this model into any other application that you like. So select which model you would like to download. I'm just going to use the Blender scene in this case, and then go down to the Name a Fair Price section. Now you have to put in at least $2 here and click the I want this, but once you get here, you can go to the discount code, type in free, give it a moment, and then you can just hit the get button. Now, if you're feeling generous, you do have the option of paying the $2 or whatever you think the model is worth, and that would definitely be appreciated. All of it goes towards helping this channel grow, but it's by no means a necessity. Back in Blender, if you've downloaded the FBX, you can go and import that. Or if you've got the Blender file, you can simply open it. In our case, we'll be working with the Blender file for this tutorial. Okay, so now we've got a model, but do you have the Retopoflow add-on yet? If not, click in the link in the description below, and it will take you to the Blender Market's Retopoflow page, which looks like this. Here you can buy your copy of Retopoflow. It's currently priced at $86. Once you've gone through the process of purchasing, you can go to your orders page, scroll down until you find your Retopoflow add-on. In my case, I actually bought this as a pack of 3 different things, so just go to your downloads page, find wherever the Retopoflow is, and download the add-on. Try and save it somewhere smart where you'll know where you can find it again. In my case, I actually have a scripts folder specifically for Blender. Now I've already downloaded this before, so I'm going to cancel in this case, and let's jump back into Blender. To install the add-on, just go to Edit, Preferences, make sure you're on your add-ons page here, and just click the Install button. Again, make sure that you've got this somewhere saved somewhere clever. Again, I've got a scripts folder with a couple of different programs, but we want Blender specifically. And now you just need to find the Retopoflow add-on. I'm just going to type flow into the search bar here. Find this very, very useful when you've got lots of add-ons, and double click to install it. Now in my case, I've actually already got this installed, but usually when you install a new add-on, it will pop it up here, and you just click to activate that, and you should see the little Retopoflow menu here get added to your screen. Okay, so you've got a model you can work with, you've got the add-on installed, let's finally start doing some retopology. Now the first thing that you're going to want to do is decimate your mesh. So this mesh has already been decimated. You can see that he's got some really triangulated topology here. But I do just kind of want to walk you through that process. So down here I've got one of my earlier scenes done. This is essentially the same model, but this is before I retopologize it. So you can see if I go and toggle overlays and turn the wireframe on here, we've got a really, really dense mesh, and there's spots where extra details being needed to be added. This is all done with Topo. So you can see the other one's a mess. This one's even more of a mess, and this one's coming in at just over 3 million polygons. So let's just disable that because it's difficult to look at. In fact, let's just turn off wireframe here. That's better. So you can see we've got Retopoflow up here, also installed. So let's click on that, and you can see here it's got performance issues. Sources are too large, greater than 1 million. So it's recommended that you work with source meshes that are under 1 million polygons. Now, technically, you can still go in here and create your initial target, and I've tested it, it does work, it's just really, really slow. So what you want to do to get this 3 million polygon model down to this 320 odd thousand, hang on, let me just hide these so we can actually get a proper count. So around about 10% or so is select your mesh, go and add a decimate modifier. Unsubdivide is really good if you've already done decent topology, so it works really well with quads. It will not work well here, so you probably just want to be using collapse. Probably not a bad idea to have symmetry turned on for this, and then just grab your ratio and drop it to, 0.1 or something. Now I'm not going to do it in this case because it will take like a minute or two to kind of crunch through all of those polygons. Okay, so back in our pre-decimated model file here, let's go, and so this is how you create your retopologized mesh, your target mesh as it calls it here. Click this button. Now before we do that, there's one last little tip that I do want to throw your way. If we just go over to view here, you can see we've got our 3D cursor. Now it's currently set to 0, 0, 0. That's good. Just as a demonstration, I'm just going to offset this a little bit. So you can see now we've got the 3D cursor. Let's just kind of give it some random nothingness and just offset it over there somewhere. So now when we go in here and go and create our target mesh, give it a moment, it'll have to go through its little loading process. We get our little welcome message here. You can disable this once you get used to it, although I'd recommend letting it pop up the first couple of times just until you get used to some of your keyboard shortcuts. But let's go and close that for now. And one of the things that kind of annoys me a little bit about Retopoflow is that it doesn't turn on symmetry automatically. You have to go and do that manually. I'd say 95% of the time, whenever I'm retopologizing, it's symmetrical, so probably worth having that on by default. But turn that on. Now, when this is working, you'll usually get a little red line going down the center. Let's just go and add something, anything here. Drag that across there, and you can see that just doesn't seem to matter what I do, I don't get anything. So let's just tab and drop out of here. You can see that it has created our mesh, Retopoflow, but it's gone and offset it over here, which is breaking our symmetry. So we're going to need to delete that and make sure that our 3D cursor is set to 0, 0, 0. If you don't do that, as you can see, it breaks. So now let's go back into Retopoflow, recreate our mesh. Again, it'll have to quickly run through its little loading sequence. It's a little bit faster because it's already done it once. Close that. Again, make sure that symmetry is turned on. And now you can see we're getting our little red line down here. And if I go and just grab our contours thingy here, you can see that now we can start to draw things. I'll just undo that so we can talk about our tools next. But yep, that's just something that if you don't make sure that's set properly, it'll break the entire thing. So make sure it's set properly when you start up. So just a couple of things about the interface. First of all, symmetry doesn't get turned on automatically, which we've already discussed. turn that on, assuming that you need it, which will probably be most of the time. Then you've got all of your tools down the side here. First of all, you can automatically select those by just going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, up to 8. Then contours for 1 again. So you've got just your numbers to get to those. You've also got what's called the tilde key to bring up a little pie menu here. So the tilde key is that little one right in the top left-hand corner between the tab and the number 1 on most normal keyboards. That little strange squiggly line there is called the tilde. There's your little random tip of the day. So we can do that to bring up, once again, all of those tools again. So let's go through these tools one by one. So rather than starting at the top with the contours tool here, despite it quite possibly being my favorite of all of these tools, let's start down here with the Polypen and the loop tools, because these are the tools that they're pretty similar to the ones that we've been using in the previous videos, so this will be a good place for us to start. So the Polypen tool is very similar to Blender's inbuilt Polybuild tool. You use it to create individual polygons. Let's just zoom in on his chest here, because this is a nice big area for us to work with. Hold down the control key. So you can see when we hold down control, we get a little green dot here, and if I click and drag away, we start to get our first edge. And if we move our mouse over here, you can see that we can create our first triangle by clicking. From here, you can either leave it as a triangle, or if you continue to hold down control and click, you can now get your first quad. And of course, we can still come in here and move these around if we so desire. You can just click and drag, or if you click on either a vertex or an edge or whatever, you can hit G and move things around as well. So from here, to create your next quad, you want to try and click on one of these edges here. And depending on which edge you click on will determine where you can build your next polygon. So I just want to kind of build this across his chest here. So let's keep this one selected. And again, I can just hold down control and do a couple more clicks, and we get our next polygon. Now you can see that it's got both of these edges selected. It's a fairly clever tool in that now I can either hold down control and I can start clicking out here to create these edges, or if I spin my mouse around here, I can also create them going down. So just as an example, I can click down there and I could start going down the chest, and if I wanted to go back across his chest, I just have to click again on this edge and I can once again start going across. Now, most of the time you're going to be wanting to be creating quads here. You do have the option of just creating tries. Generally speaking, you want to be creating quads unless you're kind of, forced into like under an armpit or something where you can sort of terminate some edges and create tries. So to make this a little bit faster, if we come under our Polypen try quad options over here, we have a couple of different options. So at the moment we've got it set to try quad, which allows us to do this, create a try and then create a quad. Or we can select quad only, and let's just say I wanted to start going down towards his tummy here. Now, in fact, this is going to make it a little bit more difficult. I just want to shift these across a little bit first. And now I can just create quads, and I don't have to worry about doing that first step of creating a try and then having to click again to create a quad. So now I can very quickly just go bang, 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 and build in a whole heap of quads very, very quickly. You also have the option of choosing try only, which will, as you would expect, create nothing but triangles. Similarly, you also have the edge only, which will allow you to just create your edges. If you click properly, hang on, let me just undo that, go over here and make it so it's a little bit easier to see. You can see that you can just create edges and it doesn't fill in the faces. But these are fairly use case. You probably won't be using them all that often. They'd be for very specific circumstances. Most of the time, I'd say use the quad only if you've got some nice big areas that you want to quickly lay out, and then swap over to try quad if for some reason you needed to just quickly do a single triangle. And your Polypen tool is kind of your go-to tool if you want to shift around what you've created. So I can see here that I've got a bit of these polygons are stretched a little bit. So if I just come in here and select all of those edges, I can double tap G. Oh, actually, no, I can't do that with this one. I've got to use the loops tool. When you're using the Polypen, it just allows you to move things around a little bit using the G key. It uses all the Blender defaults, so I could also come in here and rotate this if I felt like it, or scale it as I feel like it. And that's kind of it for the Polypen tool. It's fairly simple in terms of what it can do, but it's very powerful. Now the Loops tool is also really simple. In fact, of all of these tools, it's probably the simplest. It inserts edges. That's basically it. So I can hold down Control and I can insert a whole bunch of edges. The only other thing that it does, similar to the Polypen tool, is that you can still rotate and scale. And in this case, if you hit G, you can actually slide edges. You can see that sliding up and down the chest there, whereas if I go back to the Polypen tool, I can actually, I've got fairly full control over where I want to move it. So Loops for sliding, Polypen for actually moving and separating. So that's the simple tools out of the way. Let's start talking about Retopoflow's more powerful features. So let's start just by, you can tap, see a lot of your Blender shortcut keys still work here, so you can tap A to select all or deselect, and you can hit delete and you've got all of these options. Again, very similar to Blender's, so let's just delete all of these vertices. And let's jump over to the Contours tool. Hey Blender heads, quick interjection here as I realized I forgot something, and it's kind of important, or at least it was confusing to me the first time I encountered it. So let's say you've done a little bit of retopology here, and then for whatever reason you hit tab and you go, yes, I'd like to exit Retopoflow and just go back to my normal layout here. And then you go, okay, I've done whatever it was I needed to do back out here in my my normal layout, and I want to go back into Retopoflow. So under here, we don't actually have an update for that. We can create a new target, but as you would expect, that creates entirely new geometry and doesn't actually connect back to our original mesh here. And none of these other options get us there either. What you need to do is go into edit mode, and you can see here we get a little bit of an update. We've still got all of these options here. We've also got this little diamond shape. Click on that and it will reboot you back into Retopoflow. You can go back in and continue doing what you needed to do. Now, as I said before, this one is probably my favorite tool, mostly because it does stuff that well, none of the other tools that we've discussed in previous videos can do. So the Contours tool has one very simple but specific purpose. It creates topology for tube shapes, so arms, legs, tails, not that we really have much of a tail in this case. So again, to activate it, you need to hold down the Control key. You can see we get the little kind of cursor symbol there. And if we just click and drag across here, we get a little yellow line. And if we release, we get our edges and vertices have been created. And you can see we've got this little 12 number here. That's how many edges we've got around the arm. And if we go over to our options here, we have the option of increasing or reducing these. You can also hold down Shift and use your mouse wheel to scroll, and you can see that we can add more or less. In this case, I actually think 12 is kind of what I would usually use for an arm. So let's leave that as it is. So to create your actual polygons, again, hold down Control, click and drag, and it goes and creates your first string of polygons. It kind of bridges between those two. And you can very quickly just scroll down the arm here. Let's straighten that up a little bit. And you can see very, very quickly, we've pretty much just retopologized an entire arm. Now, another thing that I really like about this tool, and I think it's only been added in one of the recent updates, it's smart enough to kind of know where this kind of tube shape begins and ends. So you can see, even though I've got this edge selected down here, if I go, nah, I reckon I can squeeze one more in up here around the shoulder, it still manages to go and create that. And even though I've got that one now selected at the top, if I wanted to start doing his wrist here, see, most of the tools will bridge or extrude or whichever action you happen to be doing from your selection. But this one just seems to be particularly clever in that it can detect whereabouts the tube begins and ends. Very cool, very clever programming there. Now also keep in mind that if you have a gap between some of your rings, so let's just make sure that we've got contour still selected here. Double click on this, let's just delete these vertices so we create a hole in there. If I double click on this ring here and then double click on this ring here and hit enter, you can see that we can very quickly bridge that gap. And unfortunately you can't just use your shift and scroll wheel to add any extra loops in there, so we will need to just quickly jump back to our loop tool and punch that loop back in there. So going back to contours, like the other tools, you do have the option of doing your scale and rotate and grab and everything. So let's just go and grab the loop here. If we use the G tool, you can see that we can kind of go up and down. If we scale, I don't expect scale to work particularly well here because it should just kind of reproject itself. And in this case, it kind of reprojects itself back onto the target mesh in a not particularly nice way. So maybe avoid using the scale when using the contours tool. The grab tool works reasonably well. I quite like the rotate tool. So if we just grab this one here, you can see we've got a little bit of a kink in our topology here. So if I rotate, I can actually rotate kind of around the arm. So that's the contours tool. It is predominantly used for creating this kind of tubular geometry. So let's select all of that and delete that. Let's move on to our Polystrips tool. The Polystrips tool, I have to confess, it's probably my least favorite of all of these tools. I find it can be a little bit tricky to predict. But as the name suggests, it's really quick at laying down strips of polygons. So again, if we hold down the control key here and we just draw a line across, you can see that we get a strip of polygons. And you can see that we've got these kind of handles here. We've got the white little dots and our black little dots. So if we click and drag on the white ones, it allows us to kind of shift the shape of our strip. Same here. And if we grab the black ones, it allows us to kind of use them as sort of Bezier curves, so we can get a little bit of extra shape in here. As you can see though, I'm getting some slightly weird projection, and as I move it around, it can, it's actually not doing a terrible job here, but it can kind of wrap around things in a little bit of a strange way. I always want to try and use it relatively small areas, rather than like, I probably wouldn't try to say wrap it around the shoulder or something here, although once again, it's not done a truly terrible job. The other thing is, you can see that when we hold down control, we get the this little brush symbol here. We can also tap F to change the size of this brush. So if we wanted some very, very small polygons, we can do that, or we can make it really big, and we can get some very large polygons. Just remember that we are doing retopology here, so the idea is to try and have as few polygons as possible. Oh, and that one, yeah, okay. This is where I mean that some of the projections can be a little weird. I think that was because I accidentally snapped it to the arm over there. So, like with a lot of these tools, let's just get all of this stuff out of our way again. If I, let's just get this to a nice size. If I draw a strip of polygons there, as with most of these tools, you have the option of holding down Shift and using your mouse wheel, which can then determine just how many polygons you want. Just keep in mind that going to some really high or really low numbers can do some strange things. You can see here that as I start to push it closer to 20 or above, I start to get some strange shapes. And once I start coming back down to that 5 or 6, you can see that it hasn't actually gone back to our original shape. So you do just want to be a little bit careful. You're unlikely to want to be scrolling this above 20. Likewise, if I scroll it all the way down to 1, I actually now can't scroll back up. And I'd have to hit the undo to get back to our original. Generally speaking, you're not going to be going down to 1. You'd just use the Polypen tool for doing a single polygon. Likewise, you're unlikely to want to be cranking this above. Even 12 in this instance is quite a lot of polygons. So you're unlikely to encounter that. It's not quite a bug, but as I say, you're unlikely to encounter it. Now, something I find a little disappointing about this tool, let's just go back to a slightly more normal number of polygons. You can't actually join these, so I couldn't say click on this edge or this face over here and try and draw another strip then going down here. It won't join them. You'd have to manually do that with the Polypen tool. Likewise, I couldn't say grab this and start dragging down there. This is the wrong tool for doing that. Our strokes tool will cover this. Actually, something I just realized I haven't discussed with the Polypen tool is this has a Automerge feature. So if I grab this vertex here and snap it to there and snap this one to here, you can join your islands of geometry manually. So yes, remember that you have an Automerge feature here. So if we were wanting to join some of our geometry here, we can swap over to the Strokes tool. Now this tool is probably my second favorite tool after the Contours. Contours does some things that most other tools can't do, but the Strokes tool is probably the most versatile tool in the Retopoflow kit. So let's just say that I wanted to start building up towards his neck here. I've got the Strokes tool selected. Let's double click to select this edge here. And from here, I can just draw in another line, and it will kind of bridge between those. You can see that it's given us, what's that, 2 edge loops in there. So again, if I hold down Shift, I can scroll up or down to increase or decrease the number of edges going between there. Likewise, under our options, I can go down here, and you can see that it's defaulted to 2 spans. So I will always get 2 through there. Generally speaking, let's just draw that in. I actually like to have this set to 0 or set to 1. It just gives me more control over where I want these lines to come in. So like with the Polystrips tool, this also has a brush size. So the smaller I make my brush, you can see the more spans I get. The larger I make my brush, the less spans I get. You can also just completely avoid this, go over to Fixed, and now it will give me that complete control where every single line that I draw will just be a single one, unless I decide to change it in here. Ooh, 21 is probably a few too many. Let's just swap that to 2. Now if I draw, you can see that, oh, that's because we don't want to actually be using these spans here. We want to use the fixed spans. So if I change that to 2, and now draw, you can see that we get our 2 spans, and I can always still use my mouse wheel to bring that up or down. As I said, I like to have this set to 1. It just gives me kind of complete control over how many spans I get in there, and I can always use my mouse wheel and Shift to add more if I feel like I need them. Now with the Strokes tool, we don't always have to start with a piece of geometry, so if I select all of this and delete everything, there's no reason that I can't draw my first line manually. Yeah, 6 seems like a good number. And then draw in my second line, third line. So we don't actually have to start from a piece of geometry to make this work. Also keep in mind that you don't need to do an entire edge loop here. You can just say select these 2 if you want and start bringing these down. Likewise, I can swap over to this top edge loop and start drawing over here, or I could start going down the shoulder if I felt like it. We can also just start a completely new piece of geometry by deselecting everything and just coming down here and starting anew. You can see that's given me a little bit of a strange projection over here, but I can just kind of move that back manually. So you can see that with all the versatility that this tool offers, you can very quickly add, you know, some really big pieces of geometry. So I tend to use the Strokes before I use the Polystrips tool. I just find it much more useful. So the Strokes tool, very, very good at very quickly adding large chunks of geometry to your model. Now the other tool that's also really good for adding big chunks of geometry, as well as bridging between some of these islands that we've created here, is the Patches tool. Let's just start by deleting everything here, just for an example. Now one thing that you have to remember about the Patches tool is that it can't create geometry all by itself. So you can see I hold down the control here and I click and drag and I right click and I middle button, and it doesn't do anything by itself. You have to have something to start with. So unlike the Strokes tool, where I can very quickly just draw in whatever I want, Patches tool requires some stuff to get started. So with those in place, let's demonstrate how the Patches tool works. So let's I'm just going to build this down here a little bit further. And let's grab the Polypen tool here. I'm just going to delete these faces here and create a bit of a gap between everything. Oops. Let's delete faces rather than edges. So you can see I've got these two edges at the top selected, these two edges at the bottom. If I go over to the patches tool, you can see that it immediately starts trying to build something in between those, and it's kind of guessing at just how many polygons I want at the moment. So again, if I hold down Shift and scroll up and down, I can add or remove extra edge loops. So let's do something that kind of makes these reasonably square. And then all you have to do is hit Enter, and it goes and fills in that gap very, very nicely. But what's really cool about this tool is you don't just have to do this kind of A to B selection. It will also do these corners. So if I double click in here and select all of those edges going across there, and then hold down Shift and select all of these edges going down here, you can see that it tries to patch in between those as well. Now in this case, it's I think we've overcooked it a little bit. It's trying to connect to the arm, but if I maybe just deselect that edge there, just because this was overhanging the arm a little bit, I think it got confused, but you can see that now we can fill in this entire strip going down through here. So again, if I just hit Enter, bang, massive chunk of geometry just added. Now what we've created here is actually a really good example for some of our next tools. You can see that up here we've got some reasonably clean polygons, particularly if I just go and add some extra edge loops through there. They're reasonably square, they're nicely laid out, whereas in these ones they're kind of a little bit all over the place. Like you'd really want to sort of come in here and try to square these up, and that starts to feel like a fair bit of work. So to fix these kind of problems, we have both the Tweak and the Relax tool. Now the Tweak tool is pretty similar to, say, some of your sculpting brushes, where you can kind of brush and drag around individual vertices. So if I just come in here, I can start to move these individually and just sort of square them up a little bit, make that look a little bit neater. Just like with your sculpting brushes, you can change the size of your brush with F, and now I can move around a whole bunch of vertices all at once. Let's also bring up our Tweak menu here and our brush options, because this also changes our size. You can use the Shift F to control the strength, and you can see as we get further and further away from the center point, it gets more and more transparent. The closer we get to the center, the stronger it gets. So now we'll have a really high strength. And if I do Shift F and drag it a fair way away, you can see that, well, at this point we've got almost no influence. It's just shaking a little bit there, but it's very subtle. Generally speaking, I have it set fairly high because I want a fair bit of control. You can also use Control F, which will determine your fall off. So we now have a fairly high fall off. One of the things is that these brush options, as you change brush sizes, etc., they don't generally update until you kind of mouse over them. So you can see strength is set fairly high here. Let's set it really low. In fact, it's set to basically 0 here. And yet over here it's still saying 0.9 until I mouse over it, and then it drops considerably. Just a little bit of a UI update that doesn't instantaneously happen. So you use the Tweak tool with a small brush to just kind of move around individual vertices, make the brush a little bit bigger if you want to move around a larger selection. But if you want to use something that's maybe, generally speaking, at least a little bit quicker, you can swap over to the Relax tool, which kind of works a little bit like a smooth brush in your sculpting tools. So as you can see, if we just kind of click and drag, it sort of tries to well, smooth and relax these out a little bit. And it also seems as though it tries to keep the polygons a fairly similar size. So you can see that just with a quick relax, we can really smooth out the general shape of all of our polygons here and get something that's quite nice. Just do keep in mind that the Relax tool does seem to have a few limitations if you push it too far. So let's see if I can't get it to do this. Let's just go to the Polypen tool. I'm just going to... Why is that? That should be set to quad. I'm just going to sort of drag these over a little bit. And you can see now, just because we've got just a tiny little bit of a gap there, if I come back to my Relax tool, it actually sort of pushes them away from each other. So if for some reason you don't have a perfect center line going down here, if there's just a little bit of a gap, you can actually separate your center line geometry, which is generally not what you want. And I have had a couple of occasions where, say I was working inside of an armpit, where smoothing it can just kind of overlay some of this geometry and give you some unpleasant results. Generally speaking, particularly for these large areas, I find it works very, very well. Just keep in mind that you may occasionally want to switch back to your tweak tool just to give yourself some fine-tune control, and then you can always switch back to the relax tool, which once again starts to do a good job. So that's a little bit of a crash course on Retopoflow. I'm hoping that that's enough for you to sort of jump in and start using this add-on. Remember that all the links that you'll need will be in the description below, including a link to download this gremlin model, as well as links to the Retopoflow Blender Market page. If you've got any questions kind of about Retopology in general, feel free to post them in the comments below. Although Retopoflow isn't my add-on, feel free to post any questions that you might have, and I'll do the best that I can to answer them. Obviously, I can't do bug fixes or anything like that, but just general questions, I will do my best to help answer them. And that's all, folks. Have fun retopologizing.